Hello Internet, I'm Richie and welcome to Sounds of Stadia's SideQuest, the show where we take a step off the critical path and explore more of what the video game world has to offer. On this week's show, I'm joined by the host of the Sounds of Stadia podcast and a recent survivor of the Baker family, Mr. Chris.
Hello, Stadios.
How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I did survive the Baker family. We spoke about it on the podcast this past week. Yeah. We finished it, Richie. We did it. I'm excited, and now I'm going to go play some SpongeBob and desensitize.
Going like the polar opposite level of the pro games we got that month.
Yeah, hanging out with a starfish and a squid and a squirrel with a spacesuit on is the only way to bookend my crazy week of Resident Evil that we had together. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and as you may have noticed, no Tom this week. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. He has some adulting to do.
Serious adulting.
And this week we're going to be discussing game preservation. And before that, though, let's get into some housekeeping real quick. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that little notification bell for notifications from when we drop all of our content, such as a weekly podcast, which comes out every single Monday, our Thursday night live streams, and the first looks, which we tend to drop whenever they're pretty much done, to be honest with you.
It's whenever we fancy it.
Whenever a game's like, God, I want to do a first look on this game, we'll just get it up and get it recorded and get it published. But it's finally happened, guys. We have YouTube memberships. We've been promising them for a while, and from as little as 99p, you can get early access to this very show. And more importantly, it just supports the channel. And you'll get a nice little Stadia badge next to your name, a Stadia controller badge next to your name in chat to show off to all.
The badges are really cool. Like we've wanted to do memberships for some time because we've had our Patreon memberships, which we're wholly thankful for. But the fact that YouTube allows us to keep everything in-house in one place, it's tidier, it's easier for us, it's easier for you. And we've said on previous shows, the podcast, our live stream last Thursday, that we didn't want to gatekeep any of the memberships behind like a certain paywall. So there's different tiers, but you get the same content across every single tier. It may look differently when you read through the actual memberships, but that's just because of the way YouTube do things. But essentially, have a look at it. If you want to support the channel a bit more, there is no gatekeeping of content. Just, whatever you feel like we deserve your support, have a click around and see what takes your fancy. But we're thrilled to have it up and live. And all the ones who've already signed up so far, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of our patrons have been asking for a while, so we're very happy to finally have got it up and running. But if you want to join the discussion even further, make sure you drop into our Discord channel. There will be a link in the description below. And a lot of you jumped in last week, so that's very nice to see more friendly faces in there. But let's get into it. So we're talking about game preservation because recently the Sony shut down the Vita and PS3 stores. From what I understand, it doesn't mean you can't access games that you've already owned digitally, but means that any game that you might have been looking forward to, you can no longer buy. And we wanted to talk about how Stadia can help with this problem, with games effectively now no longer available to people.
Yeah, it's a bit of a crazy one, and I as the owner and a big fan of the PlayStation Vita, I do honestly think Stadia would run fantastically. I did actually try it on the browser this week, and it doesn't let you click around through the menus because it did cross my mind thinking, has anyone actually tried to run Stadia on a PlayStation Vita? It doesn't work without some kind of modification. I'm sure it would with some technical tweaks here and there.
Before you go further, there's a community challenge right there. I want someone to sideload Stadia onto a Vita and then drop a video of it working in our Discord.
I mean, it runs through a browser for the most part. So the Vita has a browser. So
I've seen all sorts of different sideloads of Stadia and different things. So
we've seen it on Nintendo Switch and smart fridges. So the Vita seems like a perfect vessel for Stadia, just for the portability.
Their Google TV with Chromecast as well. People sideloaded that pretty much since day one because Google still haven't released that.
So, in relation to the PlayStation news, I've done some serious thinking this past week about any top tier Vita games that I need to buy before this store goes. I believe the Vita one goes 27th of August this year. So it's not even that much notice, really. It's a couple of months, and no longer you can purchase new games, which got me thinking, what do I need to buy? So I actually went out, Richie, and I acquired Persona 4 Golden, which arguably is the best game on the Vita. It was priced down at only £8, so I picked that up for a decent price. I also ordered Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
On the Vita, because it's a great little game and it's great for on the move. But again, I have just this fear inside me now that I'm never going to be able to buy these games again. And the physical cartridges, if you just do a quick Amazon search for any Vita game, those cartridge prices, I think Persona on physical was up to about £60-70. So it's going to have a massive impact on the market. And you're totally right. We spoke about this on 2 weeks ago on the podcast, and we wanted to expand the topic because Stadia being in the cloud and not having arguably generational leaps, it will have obviously technical leaps, but the fact the platform in theory should exist from today for an infinite time gives a great place for any game that's on Stadia day one, albeit licensing could be still problems. The technology should still just be around. So if I buy a game 19th of November 2019 when Stadia launched, or I claimed the game on Pro, that should just be there in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 years. If obviously Google keeps supporting it, that is still a caveat to all of this.
Yeah, I don't want to go too much into the conversation of will Google still be around with this Google graveyard stuff for this conversation, because I feel that can be a bit of a red herring, because you could argue that for any industry and any like Nintendo could turn around. It's unlikely to do so and turn around. We're no longer going to support the Switch when the next console comes out, and then any games on the Switch are just dead and buried. So that can happen with generational shifts.
Yeah, look at the Wii U.
Yeah,
that's not even acknowledged. And I think their digital storefront may have already gone. Possibly
I don't know if the Wii U has. I know the Wii did. I remember it was maybe a few years ago.
Oh, it may have been the Wii. It may have been the Wii. But yeah, these things don't last forever, which is why I've actually, ironically, as a big Stadia fan, Richie, I'm a massive fan of having physical media, especially for games. I have cartridges that date back to the 80s. But yeah, Stadia gives us this opportunity to keep stuff in the cloud, saved in the cloud, all this original coding, these games saved there. And I would love to see Stadia become this place that can kind of just cultivate classic games. And you said before, not all games are great, which they're not. There's some really, really bad classic games.
Oh, yeah.
But if Stadia could have this interface where we actually have tabs or a search bar, you could have a whole classic era of games saved in the cloud to play indefinitely on all of your devices without the need to buy more hardware or rely on your old hardware breaking. Because I said pre-show, my Vita breaks. I'm looking at trying to source a Vita that's still working 10 years after release nearly. That window of opportunity is going to get slimmer and slimmer year on year, and it's more costly.
And you mentioned Persona 4 Golden, which is a bit out there for you. I wouldn't have thought you could go for a Persona game. But that's a sort of game where it's a classic, but it's kind of locked to a single platform, which the store is now is about to be discontinued.
Mm-hmm.
And I've not heard of any ports to PlayStation. I'm going to double check that actually.
Yeah, because Persona 5 was the first console release for that game.
Actually, Persona 4 Golden you can get on Steam.
Can you?
Yeah, apparently.
Oh, awesome. But again, to our other point, is Steam could disappear. We just believe Steam is there in perpetuity, like all these digital storefronts, but there could be a day where the company's bought, it's sold, it's broken down into different pieces and assets. And we remember when, before the Switch came out, people worried about Nintendo going software only, like Sega. It happened to Sega. Yeah. And it's just, it might be 10 years, it might be 50 years, but will it be around forever?
Well, the run-up to Nintendo was the Wii completely took a different path in terms of video games, which I actually think was a good path at the time. It was a potential exploring motion controls, and it's nice to see a big publisher, a big platform holder do something interesting with the platform. And Nintendo are the best for doing it because they kind of just do their own thing. And then the Wii U was almost like a half step back towards traditional gaming, but it flopped, and it flopped hard. So that's why I think people were worried, because it'd been since the GameCube since we'd seen a successful traditional games console from Nintendo.
Yeah. It's a crazy one. I mean, in terms of Stadia, we just mentioned there, all the different companies that can exist and will exist, and obviously they all branch out and they do their own things. Microsoft, massive umbrella company of Xbox, Nintendo don't really do much outside of the gaming industry, actually, which is kind of the weaker aspect of their business. Same with Sony; those two are nowhere near as rich as Microsoft and Xbox are. Just look at the Bethesda deals that have gone on recently. Whereas, in a weird way, Stadia and the umbrella company Google and then Alphabet, they should be around forever. I can't see ever in our life, Richie, Google not being a thing. Like, at no point are people going to go, I'm not using Google anymore because something better came along. Look at Bing, look at Jeeves, look at Yahoo.
Yeah, this is the thing.
It should be around forever now, arguably, Google.
There's even some more modern stuff out there that kind of take on Google sometimes from an ethical point of view, but they never really seem to get enough traction. I mean, you just look at Facebook and like the general consensus over someone like Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook's privacy policies and data collection and stuff. Yep, Facebook is still ubiquitous with social media. Like, even with things like Instagram and Twitter existing, Facebook is still going strong. Yeah.
Because it's such a weird one, because you're totally right there. Like, these massive companies, Facebook, and we've seen TikTok, Snapchat and such, realistically, Amazon and their Luna model, and then Google and this, could these two companies just outlast the other ones? It might take a long time, but at what point, what if PlayStation and they're charging £70 for these titles gets hammered down by the amazing value of Xbox Game Pass and Microsoft, and and Nintendo's next console doesn't land as well? And it's weird because we all think, oh no, they're going to be around forever, but there's no guarantee with that. And I think the great thing Amazon and Google have is they're backed up by so much else, so many other projects. Like, financially, they could probably just outlast the competition.
Yeah, I think we've seen things like, I think it might be LG is actually a completely different train of thought here, but like LG, I think, are moving out of the mobile phone market.
Yeah, this week they just straight up said we're done.
Yeah, so you get things like that. That's a big tech company that was a massive player in the mobile scene, especially in the transition over to smartphones. I've now pulled out.
Yeah, and they just make TVs with Stadia on now.
Yeah, and they've basically pulled out because I think it's not worth them trying to compete. And they seem to be focusing on doing what they do really well, which is TVs.
Yeah, well, outside of Apple and Samsung and kind of the Android, the rest of them, even Sony with their Xperia phones, they hold, like, you're talking like a small percentage of the global market, and it's not viable enough to make yearly iterations of their devices because the research and development costs so much money. And again, this goes back to just Stadia. It exists now. There is no hardware to be bought every 7 years, every generational cycle. And this is why games could just live on, just constantly in the cloud.
Now, I did a bit of research because I think Steam is an interesting model compared to Stadia in this. Although you have to have the hardware, you're hosting the hardware in your end, it's still, we're talking about a digital-only marketplace. And I could only find 3 games that I felt were noteworthy that have been pulled. 4 games actually that have been pulled from being pulled from Steam. One of them's returned. I'll talk about it a bit separately. But the 3 that are currently not available on Steam are Grand Theft Auto 1, Grand Theft Auto 2, and Dark Souls. But Dark Souls has a caveat that it was replaced by an enhanced edition of it. So it's kind of still there. So the only argument you really got there is in terms of types of the version of Dark Souls you're playing, which I think for most people don't care, but there might be some people like speedrunners, for example, who might care more about what version of a game they're playing for certain reasons. Certain glitches might be available, text speeds and things of that nature. Minutiae. But Grand Theft Auto 1 and 2 are believed to have been pulled purely because they're not considered to be compatible with modern hardware anymore.
It's 2 different arguments, because I would be like the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, as phenomenal as it is. I wouldn't like to see the original Naughty Dog games disappear, albeit funnily enough, because the digital Sony stores are going, you can't actually buy them on a PlayStation device anymore come their cutoff days.
And once the discs are gone, the discs are gone. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's great we've got a new modern remake of it, but I wouldn't want to say goodbye to the original because they're so different and nostalgic in their own right. But that brings up a whole different thing. But to kind of bring it all back around to Stadia and game preservation, I think it's huge because there's so many games that we were jokingly saying there about Persona 4, arguably one of the best games on the Vita alongside Uncharted Golden Abyss. And I would just probably never have got around to playing it if I hadn't bought it as a last-ditch recommended chance now, because if I look on Amazon, I ain't paying 70 quid for a game that old. I'm not going to see that on other platforms, arguably, because I don't really use Steam because I'm not that big on the PC side. So would that game just be lost to time to me until it gets like a remaster, re-release elsewhere? And it's back into this thing, like, should people have to do that as consumers, or should there be a place where, whether it's like a museum kind of setup, Indiana Jones gets in here and saves it? Like, what's happening with games? Like, there's no government, there's nothing like kind of overseeing, no council of the order deeming what needs to be saved and what can be lost to time.
I think there is some game preservation charities.
There's a 2 or 3 big ones. Big.
Literally the Game Preservation Society is the first one that's come up in a quick Google search, but it comes down to it's also, I don't think every single game can be saved, but then it's like you need to decide which ones do we save, even if they're not available to the public. It's the source code sometimes, so then it can be made available later. Because a game that was made exclusively, for example, say the Nintendo 64, had a limited run. You've only got so many cartridges. There was only so many cartridges made worldwide. A lot of them might be in landfills now, or otherwise not working for whatever reason. It makes you feel guilty about any game that you've actually just tossed.
Just threw away, but when you're talking about ROMs and stuff, it's because Nintendo, again, you're relying on a private company, really acknowledging it. And the weird thing is with business and how time goes by, if you are, say, at Nintendo now and you're like in your, I don't know, late 20s, early 30s, and you've just been recruited as the part of the design and something team, and then 20 years in your career, someone goes, oh, this great game that came out in the late 90s, we want to republish. Mike, go find the source code for that. Mike's only been at the company 5 years. You want you want Mike's predecessor, who was at the company for 50 years, who's now long retired and has no ties to the company. He knows where that source code is saved, located in whatever building site Nintendo own in Japan. You kind of, what I'm saying is, as time goes on, those ties back to where the stuff's actually saved. Is it in a drawer somewhere? Is it in a safe? Is it digitalized? There's almost like the breadcrumbs get less and less as time goes on with these things.
Yeah, I think as well we need to look at IP, how it's looked at from just generally in terms of IP holders. It's probably a lot different than it was 20 years ago. And I think games have now been largely accepted as an art form, rather than just a piece of entertainment, discardable piece of entertainment, which is why we've known there's games out there where literally, I think might have been one of the Final Fantasies where Square just do not have the source code because they got rid of it. So they don't. Big publishers at that time just weren't archiving the source code for games. So after so long, they'll probably preserve it for so long and then clear up space, because space isn't infinite in digital space. You have to have servers to store it, which means maintenance, which means upgrading them, keeping them running, redundancy. They don't last forever, so you'll need to replace SSDs or hard drives or whatever you're using. There's all them sort of complications, and the more you produce, the more storage you need. So it's, how do you deal with that? Like storage of all.
And we've said in this show that Google have so much money, and my money isn't infinite. Arguably theirs isn't, but it's a lot bigger pot of money than I have to ever will. So when it comes to me buying the hardware, like I have old PlayStations and stuff and lying around and old consoles. It's just out of shot. Out of the way I've cropped the video. Oh well, there is an OG.
You can see the corner of his PlayStation next to Crash Bandicoot.
So there is an OG PlayStation up there, but one day I will go to plug that in and it may not work. So then all of the games that I've got saved down here in disc form will not work. If I were to trust Google, though, like you said, they will still have to replace their server blades when they burn out and become degraded and such, and that takes time and money. But Google have that. I don't. So all of my collectibles and stuff, one day, it might be 5 years, it might be 30 years, they will break. It's technology. It doesn't last forever because of the circuitry and the delicate nature of which technology is. And yeah, I would rather have something long term in the cloud as an alternative. Not saying you need to throw away all your collectibles, ladies and gentlemen, that I can just boot up on my phone now or in 20 years' time and click into a tab, hopefully a folder or a search bar, and go Sonic the Hedgehog or whatever it may be, and the game is just there. No loads, no downloads. There in the cloud, good to play.
I don't think if a game was coded for an early console, I think you're kind of limited to how perfect you can get in terms of emulation. Because ultimately, you're not running the same hardware. You're not running it through, like, you're not playing your old Sega game through a CRT. That does affect how games play. But it's a version of the game that can still be made available through cloud. And as technology advances and we get better at virtualizing machines and emulation, I see no reason why a cloud service couldn't just hold games from any era of gaming.
Oh, that's the dream, isn't it? Just this library of history just in front of you. You could even break it down to decades and just be like, there's the 80s, pop, 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 all the titles pop up and just scroll throughout your leisure like Netflix style and go, oh, wow, look at all those, and just like jump in and play with no load times or anything.
I've just realised something. I need to give a big shout out to Nintendo's online offering, which is a really weird thing to say because they have a lot of NES and SNES games as part of their online service. Like a huge library from both consoles as a subscription. Maybe that is the ideal solution. So if it being a subscription, then the user is paying to maintain the service. So you're not paying for the development of the game, but you are paying to maintain the service.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one because in with Xbox and xCloud, they just announced the other week that there's a big chunk of backwards compatibility. That's hard to say. Compatibility. There's a lot of old games coming to xCloud, and Xbox have spoke actively about preserving game history, and they've added things like touch control and such into those games. A lot of the Rare catalog, Banjo-Kazooie and such. And that's great. And again, that's Xbox kind of leaning into this great PR wave they're riding at the moment of, look, we care about backwards compatibility. We care about all games. And I wish more companies would talk more actively about it. And Nintendo's is a great offering. But again, it's behind that paywall. Whereas
and it's curated by Nintendo.
Whereas again, back to on Stadia, you could buy the game and then just own it in perpetuity. Whereas, Nintendo, how many times have you bought the same Nintendo title year in, year out on different platforms, Richie?
I haven't actually done it a lot. I think I've bought some of the Mario games a couple of times, but not extensively.
But there are people out there who buy every iteration of these games when they're re-released.
You look at Super Mario All-Stars, how many people...
that's a whole different conversation because they've created a cut-off point where you can't buy that game. Remember, Mario died on the 31st of March.
Right, there's 3 games I can think of that I've bought from Nintendo multiple times. Super Mario 64, which I own on both Nintendo 64 and 3DS. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, same thing. And Majora's Mask, again, same thing. And Link's Awakening. But you could argue with the free Zelda title, and actually even the Mario title, that you're buying a different, more modern version of the same game.
Yeah.
It's like the Dark Souls thing I mentioned before, where it's being replaced by something that is meant to be objectively better, but then the original is no longer available, so there's a question mark around it.
Yeah. And even the 3D All-Stars, there's the rumor that that's using ROMs and ports to get that game, which is now, because of Nintendo's weird ethos of like putting stuff back in the Nintendo vault, is Muppets like me go out and buy it. Because I don't want to lose, like similar with Persona, I don't want to lose that opportunity to own these 3 games on a relatively new platform. I took
the opposite approach to that one, where I basically went, I really hate this as a business practice. I'm not going to support it. Because I figure like the more people, if it was almost like a personal boycott, where if everyone doesn't buy that game, Nintendo, and the reasons are, well, we love the game, but we hate the practice. You keep that available as a digital download in perpetuity, then I'll buy it. But if you're putting a timer on the window in which, I don't really care. It's one of them. It's the difference between digital and physical physical versions of a game, where
Yeah.
a physical version of the game, I totally get it takes a physical space in a warehouse or on the shelf in stores. There's going to be a length of time there where the shop owners wants to keep that on the shelf.
You're right, yeah.
Digital marketing shouldn't have that same issue, so you should be able to buy the digital version as long as the platform's supported.
Yeah, it should just be there.
Yeah. Which brings us actually nicely back to where we started. It's like with Sony shutting down the storefronts. Like, I don't think it'd be an issue if they basically announce that, yeah, we're closing down the Vita store and the PS3 store. However, the PS5 stores will now have them integrated, so you can play all the Vita games, all the PS3 games. You can purchase them through the PS5 store, and they're compatible with the PlayStation 5.
Yeah.
Which is harder for Sony than it would be for Microsoft because of the way they've developed the consoles historically. But
and it's just one of those things where, these things are just going to be lost to time unless they have some kind of forwards, backwards compatible thing on the horizon. It's I think it's ironic that you can play the Metal Gear Solid games on Xbox, but you can't on any PlayStation console currently. You can't buy them and play them because there's no PS3 games play on there, which I think is where the last collection was released. I have the Metal Gear Solid collection on Vita, ironically enough, funnily on all there, but I can't play it on my PS5. Some of the best games of all time, which is surely it baffles me that like these aren't accessible to other audiences, even though they're all games. There's got to be a place that people can jump onto these, and I think these companies owe it. I mean, they don't owe it to us; it's their private company. But you know what I mean. They feel like they just don't care about their heritage as much as the fans do, which they should. They should be proud of their legacy.
It comes back to my point where whether you see video games as just disposable entertainment or an actual form of art, and I lean towards the art side for most games, where I think video games are a form of art, and that warrants a higher level of preservation than something that it's just a toy to be used and disposed of when it no longer works, or something better comes along.
But yeah, I guess everyone should let us know what they think.
Yeah, you should do. I think there's one more point I want to touch on is I know Nintendo especially come under some criticism for their policies regarding just republishing the same game on new platforms and charging more money. And throughout the course of this conversation, I think I may have switched sides before. I think I was leaning towards the side where that should come under criticism, but now I'm thinking, but game preservation isn't going to be cheap. So if we want games to be preserved, as consumers, unfortunately, we're going to have to be willing to contribute towards the finances of that in some way, shape, or form. It'd be nice to have like what Xbox are currently doing. If you bought a game on the Xbox One, you just get, there you go, you can have it on the Xbox Series. So it's a similar idea as how like the Steam store will work and how Stadia ideally will work going forward with new iterations of hardware. And I'm not talking a Gen 2 Stadia here. I'm talking like the seamless improvement of the platform, rather than like what PlayStation are doing on some titles, where it's like, well, no, there's a PS4 version and there's a PS5 version. If you want the PS5 version, you have to pay more money.
Yeah.
So it's
there's many different avenues this could go down, and it's a shame that they can't all get on the same page and agree and work together.
Yeah, I think,
but hopefully
pulling towards a certain direction with Microsoft. I think are leading the charge on this, not necessarily in game preservation, but their like backwards compatibilities. Well, yeah, our consoles are generational. However, we're not going to pay gate stuff. If you buy a game and then you buy the next generation console, guess what? You're getting the better version of the game.
Yeah. It's definitely food for thought, and hopefully somebody over at Stadia is thinking about this long term, because it could be a great marketing campaign for them to say like we want to cultivate and curate and make Stadia the home for games going forward. And then I think that would garner a lot of goodwill for people saying, well, we don't want Stadia to go to that Google graveyard, because actually they're supporting like decades worth of history and art in perpetuity for you to just click and play through a link.
I think there's companies, there's publishers that they could probably reach out to and work quite well with on this. Things like those who used to hold platforms but now no longer do. I think like the likes of Sega and Atari are the two that immediately come to mind. Where if Stadia want to push down that avenue as well, working with a Sega so you can get all the Sega legacy content, or actually that's almost a better fit for like Amazon Luna in terms of a channel. He's a Sega Genesis legacy channel.
Yeah.
But I personally would rather buy the game I want to play.
Yeah, I mean, with Stadia, you could have both. We know we're getting Ubisoft Plus globally eventually, rather than just being in US beta. That could be an option to purchase the game or subscribe and get them in a subscription every month.
I can see a freeway partnership there. Hopefully someone at Stadia will listen to this and go, that's a brilliant idea, Richie. We're going to get in touch with the Game Preservation Society. We're going to get in touch with Sega, and we're going to bring all the Sonic games to Stadia. Bring Sonic to Stadia, damn it.
Please, yes. Nate, Kirk, Grace, Chris, do your magic. Work your magic. You can do it.
Yeah. And Knuckles.
And Knuckles.
Yeah, we want Knuckles over there as well. But that's all we have time for you this week. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon if you want to know when we publish all of our stuff. Because if you don't hit the bell icon, YouTube, despite the fact that you're a subscriber, won't tell you. Because YouTube is YouTube. Again, YouTube memberships are up for minimum as low as 99 pence if you want to support the channel and get this show a whole 5 days early. Make sure you jump into the Discord for further conversation and check out our other shows, such as our Thursday night live streams, where we've recently just finished Resident Evil 7, and by this time we'll probably been playing Killer Queen Black with the community. So,
and the devs.
Yeah, and the devs.
Jump in.
I've been Richie.
I've been drinking a drink at the wrong time. My name's been Chris.
We've been Sounds of Stadia. Thank you very much for watching. Quest completed.